I want to focus on. I think one of the things we can make the biggest difference in our communities and for our constituents is to improve the driving culture in Kansas. It should just be good manners, but unfortunately, it's not always. So today is going to kind of focus on some of those things on uh, on that aspect of it. And I know we have a lot of questions when we talk about fines and stuff. It always is fines plus court costs. So to start off, Jill did some research on what court costs are across the state. There's a big difference between district court costs and municipal court costs. So Jill, could you walk through that memo with us, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jill Shelley with Legislative Research. And as he said, the chair did ask me to look into some court costs. So we have district court costs and municipal court costs. District court costs are set by statute. KSA 28172A sets those court costs at $86. Also in statute, we have $22 that is directed to the non-judicial personnel from the Supreme Court. Now, municipal courts.
Yes. Real quick. So is the total court costs, if it goes to district court, $108 then?
Yes.
So I've got to add the 22 to the 86.
Yes, that 22 though is dedicated toward non-judicial personnel.
So it's $108 district court. Okay.
For municipal courts, it varies quite a bit. I called about a dozen different courts and looked at their websites and talked to people, looked at all sorts of things. And what I found varied from $45 or actually to $108 in Dodge City. There's a list on page 2 of the bill or of the memo, pardon me. Like Overland Park says at least $25, but that's included in their fines. Their fines run up to $124.50. A survey by the Kansas Association of City County Management that was reported in 2018 found an average and median court costs of $75 and a maximum of $162. And that was based on data from 175 different courts. There's also another charge that is in state law in KSA 124117, and that adds to $22.50 for things such as the local law enforcement training reimbursement fund, the Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training Fund, the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund, the Trauma Fund, the Department of Corrections Forensic Psychologist Fund. And that amount of $22.50 was most recently amended in 2017. However, then we run into home rule. Under home rule, municipal courts set their own court costs. And among the variations, according to a representative of the League of Kansas Municipalities, might be the number of judges they need to support or the types of services they need to offer, for example, drug testing. So the memorandum includes some information from the case Farha versus City of Wichita from 2007, in which the Supreme Court found a city could use its home rule authority to exempt itself from the statute prohibiting collection of municipal court costs with adoption of a charter ordinance. And the memorandum includes several points there made. Now, this variability in municipal court costs has been a concern of the Kansas Supreme Court, and in 2017, it asked an ad hoc committee to look at that, among many other things. And that ad hoc committee did recommend that those court costs be made more uniform, and they are not consistent. They also very strongly made the point that the court costs should reflect the actual costs of providing those services. And the LKM representative said that municipalities have made an effort to follow those recommendations. With that, I'm happy to answer questions.
So again, trying to get back at what the actual cost is per individual. So like, the wonderful metropolis in the Southwest, the city of Dorothy, or the home of Dorothy, Liberal, Kansas, it has court costs of $80. So does that mean that if you get a fine, you actually pay $102.50 because of the $22.50 down below, or is that included in the 80?
For most of these, it was very clear that the 2250 is included in the amount listed.
Okay, all right. So we can kind of figure, as we're thinking about a fine, when we're passing a $65 fine, it's really going to cost them about $175 or less, depending upon the uh, the municipality. Is that a fair statement?
It does depend on the municipality. The amount of the fine itself also may vary by municipality.
Right. Right. Okay. Any other questions for Jill? Right. Seeing none, thank you very much. Oh, yes, Representative Weigel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just thought of something as you were saying. Um, $108 for court costs at district court level, correct? Is that what you said?
It's $86 in court costs and $22 for non-judicial personnel costs.
Okay. That's it, and they're going to pay some sort of fine with that, correct? I mean, that's going to, if they are offered a diversion in lieu of a fine, because that's things to keep your things off, keep it off a record. Do they consider a diversion agreement and the diversion fees part of the district court amount, or is that like all separate entity?
I would need to do additional investigation to determine that. Sorry. I'm happy to look into that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Just so I'm following, Representative. So we're wanting to know if court costs also apply to diversion fees. Is that right? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll get into our presentations today. The first presentation today is going to be by the Drive to Zero. We have Vanessa Spartan here with us from the Kansas Department of Transportation. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Vanessa Spartan. I'm the Chief of Transportation Safety at Kansas Department of Transportation. I help to manage the efforts under the Drive to Zero umbrella, which includes the coalition. Representative Francis is one of the members of that coalition. We'll get into that a little bit more. My duties at the Department of Transportation and the bureau that I oversee are pretty diverse, but we kind of cover everything under this Drive to Zero mission. And part of the reason why we house that at the DOT is because we receive funding from National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and Federal Highway Administration to help us to do these efforts. But we do them in collaboration with a lot of different entities across the state. State, federal, local entities, but also nonprofit advocacy groups, different forms of associations. And so we have a very diverse group of stakeholders we work with. Before we dive straight into the coalition, we want to just give you some background of how we're standing as a state in terms of the amount of death and serious injury that we see in Kansas. And then we'll go over the strategic plan that guides our efforts, and then and into the coalition and kind of that stakeholder structure that helps to inform our efforts as a state, and some recent progress that we've made. So we always like to start a little bit with the why behind this stuff. So in the past 5 years, we've lost over 2,000 people on Kansas public roads, and an additional 7,500 were seriously injured. And when we say serious injury, that is disabling in nature. So those are not the minor injury events. That is, that can be loss of limbs, head injury, lifelong impacts to them. Sometimes in this presentation, we're going to refer to it combined, and we'll call them severe injuries, and that is to include the fatalities and serious injuries together. And we do that sometimes because fatalities can seem random at times, but ultimately those serious injuries, the only thing preventing them from becoming death is post-crash care. So that's why we kind of track the two together to see where we're seeing both of them happening. Behind those numbers, are very much not only people as victims, but their families, their communities that are impacted, and then those that survive, oftentimes also, have post-traumatic stress out of those situations. So we monitor early reporting notification from Highway Patrol, but also the media releases and their coverage of these events, so we can understand where incidences have happened across the state. So some good news for Kansas. We monitor, this is on our website. If you go to it, every week we update our fatality tracking number. So these are the early notifications. This is not all the crash reports received to date. That's a lower number, but this is the stuff that we're monitoring from the Highway Patrol and the media. So last year we were down almost 6% from the prior year. So 2023 is a downward trend. And more importantly, if you look at this as a 10-year horizon, what we actually see is that last year at that number of 388, it's the first time being under 400 since 2015, and we saw 3 years of decline most recently. So that's a good sign for the work of the Drive to Zero and the coalition and the work that we're doing, that we are trending in a good direction. What's more, we monitor, like I said, every single week the fatalities that come in, and week on week we do a comparison. So these are the numbers from last week, and we are currently sitting 30% below the same week the prior year. So if we hold even a similar trend in a downward direction, we're going to see another year of declines of fatalities. So fingers crossed, and we're going to keep doing our work that we do. So as I mentioned, when you combine fatalities and serious injuries together, you actually end up seeing an increasing trend. And that's because we're seeing a higher increase of serious injuries, but a reduction in fatalities. And then if you look more specifically on the state highway system versus the local roadway system, you can see where we're losing ground is really on the off system. So that is the city and county routes. And one thing to note is that in 2019, we did change our crash report. That serious injury definition included more injury levels. So we did see a large uptick in 2019, but we continued to see a rise in those off-system crashes, so our city and county roads. I listed here just a couple of the strategic actions that we've been undertaking to try and help local agencies to not only plan for what to do, but to make infrastructure investment decisions, to do education enforcement campaigns on a local level as well. Another area as a state that we see and that we're monitoring is we triggered a federal rule called the Older Driver and Pedestrian Special Rule. And basically what that says is that as a percentage of the population of that age cohort, we're continuing to increase in our fatal crashes involving road users 65 and older. More specifically, we broke that down into how many are drivers, how many are pedestrians. We're overwhelmingly they're drivers. And that last bullet actually shows that older drivers are 1.34 times more likely to be involved in a fatal crash than any other age cohort. And the big thing to say, though, is that this does not equate to fault. Involvement just simply points to that they were involved in a fatal crash. So the fault could be an age cohort, an individual that's in a different age cohort. One of the things we know when it does come to older drivers is injury susceptibility. Not only more complicated medical conditions, but also more likely to have bone injury, organ damage, suffer neck injury, things like that. So this is an area that we're looking at as a state and understanding what to do. When we did our secondary analysis, the largest area of overrepresentation was actually in intersection crashes. So we are taking a specific look at those angle and side impact events and what we can do, not only at a state level, but also to help our local agencies to invest in countermeasures to reduce those crashes. Now, the other area as a state that we can improve is in the number of unbelted occupants. So we actually do an observation survey every year across the state, and we're currently sitting at 85% of road users are wearing their seatbelt. That means 15% are not. Oh, sorry. That means 15% are not. And as a national average, we're sitting about 7% below the national average on belt use. So 15% unbelted, but there is 53% of our fatalities that are unbelted and 34% of our serious injuries that are unbelted. So that is an area of overrepresentation. So what are we trying to do in that area? We do a lot of education campaigns, and then we also partner with our law enforcement agencies to try and inform road users, but also enforce belt laws. And another area is speeding. This is an area nationally that is really a focus, but also a focus in Kansas. So this is an area that often gets underreported on some crash reports. And we know that because when you read a crash narrative, you might end up seeing that the vehicle not only departed the road, but ended dozens of yards away from the road. And so we know speed was involved, but it doesn't get triggered in the crash report as speeding related. So it's definitely an area of underreporting. Nonetheless, we're seeing about a fourth of our fatalities are speeding related. The other reason why speed matters is that it affects every crash. It's not only, it affects people's operating speed, it affects their peripheral vision, it affects driver expectation and reaction time. This image that we pulled from Washington is a good example. It's showing basically the images at left are showing at 15 and 20 miles per hour, and the image at right is 30 to 40 miles per hour. So the bottom image is showing how peripheral vision is impacted. So at 15 miles per hour, you can see those pedestrians immediately adjacent to you. And conversely, drivers were yielding 75% of the time to those pedestrians. When you get up to 30 to 40 miles per hour, they're not seeing the pedestrians adjacent to them, and therefore they're also not yielding despite the traffic laws. And it's not just drivers and pedestrians that are impacted, it's all crash types. So overwhelmingly what we see is the fatality risk across multiple crash types can even double at 5 to 10 miles per hour difference in impact speed. So especially as you start to get into those higher speed categories. So that's why we pay a lot of attention to speed, because it is the that kinetic energy is the biggest part as to crash severity. Okay, so that's it on the overview statistics of where we're standing as a state. So the strategic plan that guides our effort, it is federally required, but it also is it's an opportunity for us to work across many different groups to help guide what we call a safe system approach. And the idea is that we have reinforcing layers of protection. So it's not just about enforcing laws. It's not just about education and engineering activities. It's also, in the event of a crash, is there timely post-crash care. That's kind of our last layer of reinforcement to prevent those fatalities from occurring. So this plan helps to guide multiple efforts across the state to help us understand what can we do to keep moving these numbers down. So the plan is data driven. We use crash data and demographic data and other factors to understand where to guide efforts, but it also requires a lot of communication and collaborations across different groups. We call it a living document because it's ongoing in nature. We keep implementing everything in it. And sometimes those things that we start off with as a concept or a strategy, they have to evolve over time as things change and laws and in the environments that we work in. It helps to guide program investment areas. And then, like I said, it's developed and implemented across a broad group of stakeholders. So the coalition is the executive body. And then there are 2 levels of supporting stakeholder groups, strategy teams and support teams. The coalition, they tap skills of a broad group of executives, but ultimately their goal is to champion transportation safety on all public roads. And in total, we currently have 21 executives representing 23 organizations and associations. This slide will give you a little bit of time to look it over, but what you end up seeing is federal and state agencies, local governments are represented through the League of Kansas Municipalities and Kansas Association of Counties. You also have groups that represent law enforcement, AAA is on there, Mothers Against Drunk Driving is on there. It's a very broad group. And as we embark on our plan update process, we're going to probably expand this coalition group to include other key stakeholders in the post-crash care area. So as I mentioned, there's 2 levels of kind of supporting stakeholder teams underneath the coalition. So there are strategy teams that focus on reoccurring circumstances that contribute to these severe incidents. And ultimately, they are guided with or charged with developing strategies and then implementing those strategies that are approved by the coalition. And then there are support teams that have technical expertise and resources to help in the areas of data, legislation, and communications. So a couple examples, right? I talked kind of at a big framework level, a couple of example of recent successes. One of them is last June, we launched the Drive to Zero crash data dashboard. And this is publicly available because one of our statements that we like to say is that it's going to take everyone to get to no one being lost on roads. And so we need the public, we need local agencies, we need everybody understanding where these fatal and serious crashes are occurring and what is contributing to those crashes. So the way that the dashboard actually works, the map that's in the middle and the charts that surround it all react to each other. So as you zoom in on areas, as you select different crash areas, things like that, the data actually changes to tell you what was contributing to those events. Another area of focus is our safety corridor program. We also launched that in June this year. It is a pilot program for 5 years so the coalition can review and decide if we're going to keep this alive as a program in Kansas. There are 18 other states that have successfully deployed safety corridors, and so we're state number 19. We identified with the coalition 4 corridors that were overrepresented in crash history, but also we coupled that with conversations with law enforcement and traffic safety partners in the area to understand if we got the corridor extents right, if they needed to be adjusted at all. In total, the 4 corridors include on the western extent, you have US 8350 in Finney County. You have I-135 corridor just north of Wichita to Newton. You have the US 24 corridor sitting east of Manhattan to St. Mary's. And then you have the US 69 corridor around the Pittsburgh area. This safety corridor initiative is collaborative in nature, multidisciplinary in nature. So we do education initiatives, so high visibility campaigns and efforts. We also partner with local and state law enforcement to do high visibility enforcement activities. We did some engineering improvements initially to just get pavement markings and signing and everything up to highest standards. And then we're now in the phase that we're looking at things like speed feedback signs and digital message signs and things like that we can deploy. And then we're having conversations with first responders to understand emergency response factors as they respond to crashes in these corridors. The idea is that we will be evaluating these regularly and relaying that information to the coalition, and then come 2028, a discussion and decision needs to be made about this program. And if we keep these 4 corridors alive, if we identify new corridors, if we sunset the program, there's a lot of different things that we can consider with the coalition in terms of this program. Another big area is, we have these different emphasis areas of focus. And so in total, the coalition and the stakeholder teams are advancing 14 strategies to implementation, and they cover the areas of local roads, roadway departures, crashes, intersection crashes, crashes involving occupant protection or unbelted and child passenger safety issues, impaired driving, so alcohol and drug involved, older driver involved, teen driver involved, and pedestrian and cyclist involved. So I'm nearly to the end. So what's next and how can you stay involved? So we're kicking off the update of the state strategic plan. And with that, we, continue to ask for, more stakeholder participation. So if you have individuals in mind that you think might be good to participate in this effort, send them our way. And then the other thing is to engage with the Drive to Zero Coalition. As I mentioned, Representative Francis serves on that. So he's a good conduit and liaison. But you can also join as a friend of the coalition, which means that you can actually listen in on those meetings and hear the things that are being discussed and activities that are underway. And then last but certainly not least, I think we gave some postcards out. We have our 29th annual Transportation Safety Conference. This year it's in Topeka, and it's April 16th and 17th. We typically get around 300 stakeholders that attend that conference. It's 2 days of just talking about the diversity of issues around traffic safety in our state and things that people are working on. So with that, I'll leave this slide up, which has my information. And then Secretary Reed from KDOT is the chair of the coalition, so he can also be contacted. And our website is there with more information.
Does anybody have any questions for Vanessa about what we're trying to do in safety across the state of Kansas? Yes, Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the slide about strategies currently being implemented, is that graphic from the dashboard?
Yes.
And then what what is the time period for those?
Yeah, so I think the snippet that I grabbed was 2018 to 2021 fatal
Okay.
and serious injury crashes.
Okay, thank you. And are there other incidents you're looking at? Have you looked into road rage at all?
Yeah, so we kind of covered that in an area that we call aggressive driving, and we do capture that data. And one of the things that we'll be talking about in the strategic plan update is having a focus on what we call safer speeds, and that would include education enforcement activity, regarding aggressive driving and those types of activities. So we don't have something currently in our plan on that focus, but that would be on the table for the next plan update.
All right, thank you. I'll start looking around in that and see what I'll let you know if I have questions.
Great.
Representative Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You gave the statistic of 24% of the fatalities involved speeding. And you said, though, in another sentence that a lot of times speeding is not actually put on there. And I realized that unless that can be proved, et cetera, but do we have any kind of estimation or even your guess and everything? Is it double that? Is it triple that?
Yeah, so I don't have a good estimation on that. What I would say that we are exploring is actually you can acquire some data through third party aggregators that can give us an understanding of speeding across the state using cell phone and connected vehicle data. And we're exploring that. There's a lot of other states that are doing that. And I think that's going to give us a better understanding of where it's occurring and how excessive it is. And I would say that, it's not to say that it's unreported on the crash report. They may not check the box of speeding involved, but when you read the narrative, it would say speeding. And then that it doesn't get captured in the macro, like kind of data statistic work that we do then because of that.
Thank you.
Representative Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of quick questions, hopefully. On one of your slides, the big trend slide where you had a real spike around 2011, 2012, et cetera.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, we had some pretty rough winters around that time. And for example, this winter's been very, very mild. Are weather conditions factored into this to see, what they contribute to?
Yeah, so we haven't done like an annual trend comparison from that standpoint, but on that dashboard we do have we have a pie chart for weather involved, right? And it can say like rain, snow, sleet, like all of that's captured on the crash report. So we do have a way to see it. Overwhelmingly, most of our fatal and serious crashes are good weather conditions during daytime. So
faster, right?
yeah. So I think, and honestly, as a state, we have a large percentage of single vehicle roadway departure. So that leads to larger questions. One of the things we kind of hypothesize is it animal involved? Is it distraction involved? I mean, it could be a lot of different things if you have no witnesses to say otherwise.
I think you touched on my next question. And on the dashboard, when there is an accident, are infrastructure conditions taken into account? For example, around the accident site on that particular roadway, potholes, no shoulders, a lot of telephone poles and culverts and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. So the way that we guide our safety programs is we are looking at that data. So we call that kind of fixing the clear zones and that sort of effort. So that this crash data is not just used in the safety set aside programs. It's actually used in KDOT's big formula funds like modernization expansion programs to understand which areas do we need to go out and fix. And so it's part of everything that we do over at the DOT. In terms of local agencies, what they do, it's going to be up to that local agency if they're focusing on that. Yeah.
And one last question. And this one affects me directly and quite a few people in here. 65 plus older drivers.
I know.
What percentage of our drivers are 65 plus?
Yeah, so that's a hard one to pull. We have done this analysis with Department of Revenue with the driver's license records, and it's a large statistic. But there's also drivers that might still have a legal driver's license but are self-selecting not to drive. And so that's why we take it based upon the population cohort rather than the driver's license records.
Well, I was just thinking that
Yeah.
the size of your sample, for example,
Mhm.
whether it's young drivers, is it just 15 or 16 up to 24 or whatever, or how big is that pool? What is the percentage of people that have severe accidents in that group based on the population involved?
Yeah, so it's so the teen drivers cohort, the 14 and 19 cohort is actually underrepresented in fatal crashes, but we focus on them because there's programs and strategies we can do to make them good drivers for life. And that is so it's a preventative measure because eventually they do become adult drivers that do other things, right? In their driving habits. But all in all, the teen driver age cohort is not heavily represented in the fatal crashes.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I just want to add on to that, and I want to congratulate all of the younger reps that are in this room. You guys always exemplify good driving practices. I see it in some of the choices that you make. I mean that sincerely. Even if you do look like you're 45 and you're only 35, some of you. All right. I was going to go after Avery, but we spend a lot of time going after him. Yeah, yeah. Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you for the compliments, Mr. Chairman. So, and thank you for your testimony. So you had mentioned serious injury is going up while fatalities are going down, which the latter is great. And I don't want to take anything away from what KDOT is doing in KHP. We need more of it. It's great. Do we think car safety is getting better? I'm obviously there's a lot of things that play into this.
Yeah, so that's one of those, I would say vehicle manufacturing and what people bring to market in terms of what they purchase is kind of a moving target for us. I think there are some good advanced safety features, but then there's also a lot of evidence about the heavier vehicles and what that's doing to the crash physics. So while there's positive gains, there's also some things that are kind of pulling us back. And then we have to consider the adoption rate, right, in the state and like where do we have those vehicles with advanced safety features or one of our predominant crash type when it comes to fatal crashes is actually pickup trucks and they're some of the heaviest vehicles on the road. And it's not to say anything about a pickup truck driver, but there's some crash physics when it's a heavier vehicle.
And second, so the 4 places that we're doing the safety corridor, and I was asked about this by a couple of my constituents because it leads right into Newton, the one coming from Sedgwick County. What are we going to physically see these safety? Is there going to be more law enforcement, or what are we going to be able to see with our eyes?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that's I think the most challenging about the safety corridor programs in every state is that a lot of times people will say signs are not going to do anything. We need to see law enforcement, and they say their law enforcement isn't out there enough. One of the challenges are these are long corridors, and we're talking about 24-hour days and staffing challenges in every law enforcement agency. So what we're doing is we're capturing the data about that enforcement activity, and then we'll be sharing it across different outlets to communicate here's what has resulted out of that activity. But ultimately, I think law enforcement would agree our goal isn't to stop people and give citation. Our goal is crash reduction. Our goal is, less risky behaviors. And so we're looking at other things that we can monitor in terms of that not, those things have been prevented because people saw the messages, saw the signs, realized maybe I need to slow down. I need to put down my phone.
Very good. Well, thank you to everyone in this room that's affecting that.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have learned that the nation as a whole is speeding more. And I don't know, was it because of COVID or just because we like to speed? Okay. But Kansas included. Mm-hmm. All right. So even though you said we don't list that in reports or whatnot, are we still continuing in Kansas to be a speeding people?
Yeah, so it is captured in the crash report. It just isn't always, they don't always check the box on it, even when it's in the narrative. And so I would say that anecdotally, what we're hearing from people when we do focus groups and perception surveys and things like that, people say everybody's driving too fast, everybody's on their phone. And then the challenge we see is that if it's not captured in the crash report, we need to find another way to figure out where it's occurring and how to target our resources. And that's why I brought up earlier when the question was asked, that's why we're looking at things like third party data to try and understand it a little better than kind of just a big concept, I guess.
My other one that bothers me a lot when you say the unbelted
Mm-hmm.
depends 85%. So we're 7% below. So basically, is that to read that about 92% of the nation is actually using their seatbelts?
Yeah, according to each state does a statistic sampling of belt use using observation surveys and reports it to National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So there are consistent processes across states, and according to that data, we're 7% below the national average.
So are we doing more, less, or about the same in terms of ads, signs that talk about buckle up? I know I'll use my own university. I know Bill Self.
Yeah.
We, this is almost shown at almost every other game.
Yeah.
Buckle up and all of that. But are we not doing enough? I mean, 7% is a lot in your state, especially when you say it's 53% of fatalities and 30% of serious injuries.
Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
I would say that, I think the challenge is that a lot of people have grown up at a time where you didn't use seatbelts, right? And then we also have things that people do in agricultural operations and road crews and things like that, where they're hopping in and out of a vehicle a lot. And so getting in the habit of putting a belt on is sometimes a challenge for some people. I do think that we are doing, not only are we doing those education campaigns, like you said, you've seen on the basketball games and things like that, but we also have a great program in our state called Seatbelts Are for Everyone. And it's a program in high schools across the state for peer-to-peer education and mentoring around this subject. And what we hear about the stories out of those efforts is not only trying to, help their fellow students, but they're also taking those lessons home to their parents. And telling their parents when they're not driving safe or when they need to belt up. So I think we're doing, the SAFE program actually was so successful in Kansas that now they've picked it up in Iowa and they picked it up in Oklahoma as well and are modeling after us. So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at slide number 8, where you're talking about big trends, older drivers, and you've got 65 plus. Do you have it broken down anywhere? I mean, if I look at 65 versus 95, that's a huge difference, but it's all lumped in here.
Yeah, and so I don't have that available for me right now, but on that dashboard, we do have the age cohorts like more specifically broken down, so you can kind of narrow it down into 65 plus and see where we're seeing a higher activity level in terms of these fatal and serious crashes.
At what point do you see a really massive increase, or is it peaking at somewhere? Or
so honestly, our kind of the worst area of age cohorts is in the 40 to 50-year-old range, and so then that continues to kind of fall in this earlier 60 range, and then it starts to really drop off. And I think that's also because of the question that was asked earlier. Some people then self-select not to drive, right? And so then you start to see basically less driving activity as people get older.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Vanessa? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, committee. Next on the agenda, we have Colonel Eric Smith with us here today. And once he finishes his presentation, I hope that I had Meg get us copies of Senate Bill 476. Probably the easiest thing to look at is, I think, the sub notes in there. And we'll have Chris give us a brief overview on it. But these bills are always difficult to get through the process. So if you have real comments on if you think excessive speed is a problem in our state and things that your thoughts on what a good bill looks like, I'd appreciate us trying to have that conversation. Not a debate. They're going to come back maybe next year and introduce something again, but we might have some preliminary input on it at that time. So welcome to the committee, Colonel Smith. And by the way, thank you. You reached out to me at the Drive to Zero event, and I could tell the passion that you have for this issue. And so thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. And Mr. Chair, if it would be appropriate, I just have a couple of preliminary comments. I'd like to do a couple of introductory slides and then turn the balance of my time to Captain Phillips from Hayes, who is here to really get into the nuts and bolts of what we're seeing. I'm happy that this conversation is being done in conjunction with our other interested stakeholders, in particular the Drive to Zero Coalition, for which you participate in, Chairman, and I really appreciate your leadership in those efforts. I don't know what the outcome of today's conversation will be. Frankly, I'm perplexed. And what I'm asking here today is for you as a committee to partner not only with the Highway Patrol, but those on the Drive to Zero Coalition to come up with some sensible solutions to a problem for which we have not had any progress in the last several years. The first slide that I want to touch on really has to do with history on two instances in front of this committee. And believe me, I'm not here to be critical of the outcome. And certainly this is not an effort by the Highway Patrol to seek expanded police powers. It's not an effort for you to authorize us to write more citations. As you can see later on in the presentation, God knows we write too many the way that it is. What we're looking for is for our efforts to impact behavior. And that's not happening. In 2022, in this committee, House Bill 2628 passed out of committee and it was stricken from the calendar at turnaround. It was I wasn't here at the time, but by all accounts, a good and a reasonable bill. But what it did was, in some sense, criminalize speed. In other words, it made excessive speed, as defined by that bill, a misdemeanor offense, as opposed to a traffic infraction. And there was some discomfort with that, and I'm sensitive to that. The following year, last year in 2023, and out of this committee, House Bill 2146, kind of reversed the criminalization or making that a misdemeanor, and again, focused on fines. And at some point, that failed to get beyond the floor. This year, we decided not to focus on fines and instead focus on what we thought might curb behavior, and that was to touch someone's driving privileges. Starting out with a 2-week or a 15-day restriction, second conviction, a 30-day restriction, third conviction, a 30-day suspension. And we were not able to get that off the floor of the Senate. So that gives you just a little bit of a history of what we're facing. And I am not privy to the nature of why those bills failed or why they didn't progress any further, but perhaps it's because we and others come in and talk to you about a problem, but we're not very effective in showing you exactly what that problem looks like. And so that's what I want on this next slide, is to actually show you what it looks like when troopers face or encounter drivers who are speeding excessively, speeding in excess of 100 miles an hour. And for purposes of this conversation, that's what I want to talk about. It's not driving 75 in a 45. It's not driving 95 in a 75. It's not even driving 40 in a school zone. What we're talking about is speeding in excess of 100 miles an hour. And I think we can all agree that that, in no circumstance, is appropriate. Now to begin the movie part of this. This is a 3-minute clip There's no audio, but I'll just tell you as you're watching this that this is a Kansas Highway Patrol helicopter that's picked up on a vehicle that's run from Shawnee County Sheriff's deputies, fled east from Topeka, and he's now in Lawrence. There are no law enforcement officers pursuing this car right now. The pursuit has been terminated due to his driving. And the occupants of this car are now trying to get to K10 southeast of Lawrence. We're now on K10. We're traveling east from Lawrence. And if you can see, 80 knots is the speed of the helicopter. So now he's at 111 knots. And I apologize for this buffering. It really doesn't do justice for what this looks like on the ground. "111 knots. So that's about, now we're at 122 knots. So he's approaching 140 miles an hour. Traffic is heavy. Passes on the shoulder with no regard. Passes on the shoulder again, no regard, in and out of traffic. These are law-abiding citizens traveling in Shawnee County, Douglas County, Johnson County, your neighbors, your constituents, perhaps your family, your friends, your kids. I actually drive this roadway twice a day to and from Topeka. Cars trying to signal to get out of the way. Again, I can make this video available offline to folks to see what it looks like when it's not buffering. It's sickening to watch. He's through DeSoto. Approaching more heavily populated western Olathe and western Lenexa on K10. Cuts off on the shoulder. And here in the next few frames, I think it's this truck right here. He cuts off right here. Bam. Crashes. Flips it. That car turns over. He spins out. He rolls up on his side. Wait for it. It'll take just a couple seconds for you to realize what's happening here. He's out. He's okay. The car flipped on the side. Then it fell back on its wheels. The brakes are so hot that he's going to catch all of the brown foliage on fire. He hops out. Wait a minute. A child. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, that's what we're faced with when we talk about speed in excess of 100 miles an hour. Again, I'm not here to ask for the ability to write more tickets. Captain Phillips will show how many tickets we already write, but they're not changing behavior. And I need your help. I need the help of the Senate to figure out a solution that when we write those tickets, it impacts behavior. That's the aftermath. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured in this crash. Fire department came, put out all the fire, tended to everyone. And stop the video. But I hope perhaps that does, in some small way, articulate exactly what the problem is. It's not 100 miles an hour. It's that type of driving that affects you and your constituents. And with that,
let's have a couple of questions here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Representative Hall-Heisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for being here today in that presentation. So this case right here, what all was the individual charged with after?
Turns out that car was stolen. So there are going to be some criminal charges. He'll be charged with a variety of traffic offenses, probably through 3 different counties. That was an excerpt of a video that was probably 10 times as long. So there are a lot of traffic infractions that he can be charged with, irrespective of the underlying criminal offenses. The point to that presentation wasn't to demonstrate his criminal activity. It was to demonstrate what driving in excess of 100 miles an hour really looks like to the people around you who don't see him coming and can't react, and really the decreased reaction time and capabilities and peripheral vision of actually someone who is driving at that excessive speed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So just to add on to what the representative mentioned, he could be charged already with reckless driving under these circumstances, couldn't he? And I guess child endangerment would be another thing. I mean, we have some pretty serious criminal. It's almost a culture issue, isn't it? Almost more than the severity of the fine, because this guy made the decision to do this. Well, I don't know why he made a decision to do that.
Yep. No, the point is well taken. I do though think that, particularly as you listen to what Captain Phillips talks about and some of the photographs that he shows, where these 100-mile-an-hour plus instances are occurring. And certainly, I think he's going to show you a picture of a 151-mile-an-hour radar lock that occurred the morning that we presented this bill in Senate Transportation. The driver of the car doesn't have to be a criminal. The driver of the car isn't always in a stolen car. He'll talk to you about 2 citations that were written last month, probably 10 minutes apart on the same stretch of highway by the same trooper that both had children in the car. One of them was unrestrained. It's about behavior. It's not about, the demographic of the driver. I think, myself included, it's easy to get into a car and to turn on the radio or to get on the phone or decompress at the end of the day and not see what's happening to your speedometer. But the idea is to change that. And, once you hit 100 miles an hour or in excess of 100 miles an hour, it doesn't matter if you're on I-70 in Western Kansas. The instances of fatalities are high out there as well. The instances of serious injury crashes are high out there as well. And to the extent that excessive speed was at least in some part a factor in the serious or fatality crash, that's what we need to try to curb.
Representative Ballard? Okay. Representative Hall.
Thanks, Chair. And I have 2 different questions on this. Thank you for recognizing me a second time. If I could, I want to build on that real quick. I guess, could you give us a rough estimate breakdown of how many of these are in the commission of another crime, as opposed to just somebody that is just going excessively over the speed limit? Do you have a rough estimate of what that would look like?
It would be speculation for me. I do know Captain Phillips has a slide that touches on secondary offenses that are charged in the course of an excessive speed citation. Most of those are also traffic related, though, as opposed to criminally related.
Okay.
I would also just note anecdotally that, particularly in urban areas, Wichita, Kansas City, Topeka, I get a page every time a trooper initiates a pursuit. The majority of those pursuits are terminated because of excessive speed and because of the urban area or the environment for which those occur. So to the extent we're not able to successfully resolve that pursuit and take a driver into custody, it's often unclear what some of the underlying or collateral criminal offenses might be.
I appreciate that response. My second question, Mr. Chair, if I may, is we've seen a few different versions of this bill. One bill was just saying anything over 100 miles an hour. I believe, Mr. Chair, we had one a few years ago that was 35 miles an hour plus. So, do you guys have any thoughts on the preference of the hard 100 or doing something to where it's 35 miles an hour plus 35 miles an hour down in Wichita is, it's a residential street or whatever. You do 35 miles an hour plus you're going 70 down a neighborhood street, a residential street, just a side street or whatever. Obviously that's fast too in those areas. So do you guys kind of have a preference on how you would prefer that? A flat 100 miles an hour or a 35 miles an hour plus?
Well, I think 35 miles an hour over the posted speed limit is excessive in any event, but it only takes 25 miles an hour over the maximum speed limit that exists in Kansas to be going 100, right? So in 4-lane divided highways, most interstate highways in a rural setting, maximum is 75 miles an hour. So 35, you could be going, 110. So for me, that's why I think that 100 miles an hour is, it's probably a bad analogy, but it's synonymous to 0.08 for DUI. It doesn't matter how impaired one is. It doesn't matter how stumbling drunk someone is. If you're 0.08, that's de facto too intoxicated to drive. And so for the purposes of what we have proposed this year, I think 100 miles an hour is that sweet spot. But I'm not married to that. If there's a sensible reason amongst the policymakers in both chambers to go a different direction, as long as we make progress.
I got it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think that's kind of the important thing here is to make progress. You know, we all have a different idea about what we think it should look like or if there's a problem at all, but I think there is a problem. We need to make progress. Representative O'Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I do agree with you with respect to that no one should actually be, driving that fast, over 100 miles an hour. But I still have some reservations with respect to emergencies. Say, for instance, somebody's having a heart attack at my residence. I'm not a medical professional. I don't know what to do. I don't want to use the word freak out, but I just I panic, and I try and get whoever it is. Maybe it could be a relative of mine that I really love, or whoever, into the car. And I represent Wichita, and I know the two major hospitals in Wichita. You have Via Christi, you have Wesley. And say, for instance, I live in a rural part of Cedric County. And a situation comes whereby I get the person into the car, they're become unconscious, okay? I get even more frightened. Could be in the middle of the night. I've heard Representative Minix talk about the same example, whereby at that particular point, when you get into your car and you're driving, you can care less what the speed limit says. You care less what the law says, because you want to get that loved one to the hospital. How do we address that?
So that's a great point. And so first of all, I would say that even if the person driving the critically injured or ill to the hospital was in the back of an ambulance, there are even reasonableness standards that are applied to ambulance drivers. But in your case that you described, one thing that I talk and have talked to the troopers within KHB about, it was even brought up by Senator Wilborn in another session, the use of discretion. The use of discretion is absolutely important. And in a situation that you're describing, I would hope that a trooper would be sensitive to that and do everything that they could to get you the help that you needed in the most appropriate fashion. But because I don't supervise the Wichita Police Department or the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Department, in the event that discretion wasn't implemented at that time, you make a good case to go before a judge and to argue that citation, I guess would be the safety valve there.
Right, but in that situation where if a trooper is chasing or a sheriff deputy, they don't know the situation going on. They just see a car, flying through. They think it's, someone who's just being careless. But, we just saw that video. You didn't know there was a child in the car. You didn't know what the circumstances were. We just saw a car flying through. Same thing. Could have been someone that may have gotten, was shot. I'm trying to get to the hospital. I don't know what's going on. My question is, how do we, instead of us writing laws saying, well, over 100 is excessive, yes, but how do we address the same thing whereby in emergencies like that, we don't know what the situation is? Should the trooper continue following the car to the exact location, like in terms of if they're going to the hospital, or maybe they're trying to make it to a place where a loved one is about to pass and they're trying to see them before they go? How do we address that? That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a quick response, if I might. I think that
and I hear what you're saying. I mean, don't get me. I'm not. Yes, I totally agree. 100 miles over is excessive. I totally agree with that. But there's another side to the story too. So that's why. So thank you.
And wherein no law is absolute, I do think that society has a general expectation that law enforcement intervene and intercede and stop that type of driving, lest something worse happens.
I might just add, Representative O'Hobson, that's kind of why these bills never go anywhere. But we already have fines for driving in excess. So, you got to kind of work under the system we already have. I mean, you'll get a ticket anyway. Under the current law, it's not like this is a new law. I thought, anyway. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here today for testimony, and thank you for your service. So what is the current penalty for a reckless driving charge? And is that a misdemeanor or is that just a traffic violation?
So reckless driving is a misdemeanor. It's punishable by considerable fines as well as jail time. The problem with the reckless driving statute is it carries other elements beyond speed. There could be a scenario, I'm thinking out on I-70, where you can drive for 30, 40, 50 miles and not see anyone or anything. There probably aren't enough other evidentiary factors that could be applied to the scenario to push a prosecutor to pursue a reckless driving charge as opposed to just driving 110 in a 75.
I think, you see a video like that and it's, I can't imagine the job that your men and women do day in and day out on those highways and the risks they face. So I understand why you're here asking for what you're asking for, but I think that the conversation that broke down the bill, the two previous attempts to do something with this, is that there's a difference between, driving 40 or 50 miles on I-10, or I-70 and never seeing another car, and what that idiot was doing. And so the fact that there are kind of complicating circumstances that draw the reckless driving charge sort of takes that into account. And so in the spirit of what you asked, which is, raising the concerns, I agree with the representative from Wichita's concerns. And I also think that, a flat, this is the number, and whether you're, not seeing another human being for an hour or you're in midday traffic on, US 69, we're going to apply the same penalty. I think that was kind of the concern that the committee had when we tried to do this the two other times.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here and your service. I just would like to kind of add something to Representative Hobson's statement. Is summer before last, my husband had a heart attack. I loaded him in the car and wanted to go to the nearest hospital, which, so once I get on the highway, I call 911 and I tell them what's happening and I tell them I'm driving fast. And they instruct me to go to the nearest fire station where they had an ambulance meet me. So maybe just some education along that way. I live western Wyandotte County, but as I go travel east on I-70, I see these high-speed things all the time, not police chases, just playing among themselves or whatever they're doing. And it's very dangerous. So I agree something needs to be more, but be done to help that. But I also would say maybe some education along that line, that if you're doing something like that, call 911 and report what you're doing.
Representative Hall Heisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for a third time now. I've got several things here. A request for research to look up the definition of reckless driving. Also, the ticket for going 25 miles an hour over the speed limit on the Kansas Turnpike. So that would be 100 miles an hour, basically, on the Kansas Turnpike. If they could look those two things up for me, I'm just curious. And then my question again for you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. So, if I'm reading this right, this bill currently SB 476, it would just restrict a license for 15 days after first conviction. We see just a ton of driving on suspended, especially in my county, Sedgwick County. But you guys, we wouldn't know that they're driving on suspended unless we're pulling them over for another traffic infraction. So how I guess, how preventative would it be to pass this? I mean, would it really have an impact? Because I feel folks who do get their license suspended or restricted, they're still going to drive on them. We see that all the time. We know they're going to continue to drive on them. So would this current form actually have an impact, or would it be better to levy stronger fines?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that question other than the previous trips to the well, if you will, were unsuccessful with the thought of stiffer fines. The one thing that I would say about fines, and this goes into something that Ms. Spartan and the folks from KDOT talked about, behavior, and that is whether or not folks from Wichita, for example, trying to get to Topeka or Kansas City are willing to pay a fine should they get caught driving 100. Whatever that fine may be, it's going to be less than probably $300 by the time you include court costs. Maybe right about there. In today's culture, in society, that's just a toll, and that's a toll some people are willing to pay for the right or the ability to drive over 100 miles an hour. And I think, at least from where I stand and seeing what I see, it's incumbent upon policymakers at some point to say, we can't tolerate that type of behavior. So that's to me, I think, goes back to why I stuck at 100 miles an hour as opposed to 25 over whatever the graduated zone is. So I again, as I said at the outset, I don't know what the answer is, and I don't even know what outcome I'm looking for other than what can we do to curb the behavior.
No, and I appreciate that. I just look at this, and I mean, I know people that have gotten their driver's license suspended or restricted, continue to drive on them. So I would think, at least from where I'm coming from, I would rather have my driver's license suspended for 15 days, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and continue to drive on my restricted license than pay a $300 fine that possibly, I mean, if designed right, can continue to escalate every single time they're a knucklehead on the road. So I think, to me, that may swing a heavier hammer on these folks than just a 15-day, or I guess up to a 30 days restricted driver's license. So that's just my thoughts on this part. And then I'm sorry, sir. Go.
I'm sorry. I would submit proponent testimony on behalf of that bill, sir.
So I've researched.
And of course, then if they can't pay it, they get it restricted or suspended, which we're all one of those endless circles. You guys had some answers for the representative's requests.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So for definition of reckless driving, it's any person who drives any vehicle in willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. It is a misdemeanor. First conviction is sentenced to not less than 5 days nor more than 90 days imprisonment, or fined not less than 25 nor more than 500. For second and subsequent violations, persons shall be sentenced to not less than 10 days, no more than 6 months imprisonment, fine not less than 50 nor more than 500. So that's reckless driving. To the other question, for 25 mile per hour over a 75 mile per hour limit, which that's how speeding tickets are written, by what you are over the limit. So that's put in the category of 21 to 30 mile over the limit, which is 105 base. And then it's additional $9 per mile per hour over 20 miles per hour. So for 25 miles per hour, if my math is correct, that would be $150.
Okay, and does that include court costs?
Does not include court costs.
So can you read just again the definition of reckless driving?
Yes, it's any person who drives any vehicle in a willful or wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property.
And in the subsequent times they're convicted of the convictions, is there a mechanism to suspend or restrict driver's licenses?
I believe there is. It's not in this statute. I would have to look a little further.
Okay, I appreciate that research. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't completely disagree with you on this one for a change, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you. But my question deals with, we're talking about reckless driving. we're talking about speeding, everything, but this could go into criminal charges. Wouldn't fleeing and looting? I mean, if you guys get behind them, they refuse to stop, etc. Wouldn't it go into criminal charges, etc.?
Yes.
Okay, and then we're talking about a considerable difference in what happens to that individual. Correct?
Yes. That would be a bookable offense.
Which is why we need you guys everywhere. So I just wanted to say real quickly too that I had an instance where my wife was having our second child and we were out west, and I was escorted by a trooper out on from about Kingman to Wichita, and we got there pretty fast, and it was a good thing we did because I think we were there about 11 minutes and everything before she had my second child. So, and we did not, no offense towards people out west there, but we did not want to have him out towards Kingman in a barn. So, yeah. Thank you.
I hate to be argumentative, but Kingman is eastern Kansas. But
West of here.
all right. Hey, could I ask? I hate to cut myself to the first of the line, but what happens when you guys call off pursuit because they're going too fast and you've got their driver or you've got their tag number? What happens then? I mean, is it you can't do anything about it because you don't know who was driving, or what's the protocol?
It depends. There's a variety and a graduating scale of investigative effort that goes into that. The tag number is a good first step to try to locate who the driver actually was. A lot of times, and I hear this frequently, where a trooper will call off a pursuit and then go to the address listed on the registration, only to be met by someone who said, I sold that car. That tag's been stolen. That car's been stolen. I loaned that car to my son, but he's here. He doesn't know where it's at. There are a variety of obstacles to identifying the driver. There is some success at identifying that driver and then charging them after the fact. But in those instances, the charge isn't limited to the speed. It then goes into the evade and the elude as a result of the pursuit. So,
And how successful are those prosecutions?
I would suspect, and it's a little bit of a grab here, but I would suspect less than 50% of those instances are we able to get a prosecution.
Okay, thank you. Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I was looking at the graphic for the citations for 100 plus and the different counties. What popped out at me when I'm looking at this is that the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down from Thomas County down to Russell. Are those all on I-70?
Yes.
It looks like Ellis County is like the launching pad that their 100 plus citations are 965. Then the only other one is Thomas County, which is going further west, is 1111. It drops off considerably down to, well, Russell, which is right next to Ellis County, which is roughly almost half, down to 528. And I don't know if, which direction those violations are occurring, but those are pretty much all on I-70, correct?
Yes.
What's going on in Ellis County?
If it be permissible, that's my partner in crime here is the captain of Troop D in Hayes in Ellis County, and those are his slides. So if now would be an appropriate time to make the transition, he can speak to that perhaps.
Yeah, and we are going to run out of time. Representative Essex.
It's just something.
Representative Ballard, is it all right with you if we let him finish the slides, or do you guys have a quick question you want to ask the Colonel?
Thank you.
Quick question.
I think I'm gonna have to say this one. You wondered what we could do in many ways about it. I think as I sit here, I have heard the conflict. Part of the conflict is when I was watching that red car, I counted at least 10 people he could have taken out as he was going along. And he also got part of the truck. But he was just going in and out and in and out. So I see that as, I don't know, do we look at the speeding or did we look at the endangerment of lives there? And I saw the endangerment of lives. If they were passing me or my son or somebody else, it was like out of control. So that's one thing. On the other hand, we have spent a whole lot of time talking about how much was it going to cost in a fine in order to get this, to take care of this situation. Well, what would have been the cost of several of those lives as they were speeding along? So on one hand, there's a group of people that worry about who could have died as a result of someone else being in a hurry. Not that we are not always ourselves not in a hurry. And the other is how much is it going to cost? And is it too much for that? So that's where I see the major conflict is between some people not wanting to really find people in the process and people like myself. Wait a minute, there's a price to pay for being reckless and for both of us having space on that road.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, would you introduce the next conferee, Colonel, again?
Certainly. Captain Travis Phillips, he's the troop commander of Troop D in Northwest Kansas, based in Hayes.
Welcome to the committee, Captain.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate the opportunity to stand before you and speak about something that's very passionate to me. As the Colonel alluded to, I am the captain of Troop D, and that is as you look through your materials, those are the 6 counties along I-70. We have 18 counties in Troop D, and 6 of our counties go along I-70, and that's where those reds and yellows show up. In fact, about half of the tickets written, the 3,000 tickets written a year in Kansas for going over 100 miles an hour, were written in those 6 counties. We have the 18 counties, 16,000 miles of interstate, and there's 29 troopers to take care of all of that. And I guarantee if we had more troopers, the number of tickets written would be way higher. If I never had to write another 100-mile-an-hour speeding ticket starting today, that'd be awesome. But the fact is, we all know that that Kansas Highway Patrol on the highway is a deterrent for people going 100 miles an hour. And since 2013, you can see how that has extrapolated significantly up into the 3,000s a year statewide. And so we're really, truly, I need your help. We need your help. The citizens need all of our help to figure out how to mitigate this. My family travels that road. We have a famous representative from out that way that's present in the room today, travels that road, and we appreciate you. And so I guarantee I get so many calls in my house when I'm off duty of people calling me, telling me, hey, somebody just blew by my car and I'm upset, and I give them star 47 and we try to get them stopped. So anyway, I'll move along with the statistics. Most of these are coming along I-70 or interstate systems, 4 lanes. Basically, you need 4 lanes to get up to speed, and they're utilizing both lanes to get up to that speed. They're over driving. They're very safe cars. The cars nowadays are very safe. They want to save your life, but the faster you go, the less that's going to happen. Your car was not designed to save your life at 100 plus miles an hour. I'm just telling you. And now you go across the median because you swerved or you blew a tire or you hit something in the roadway, and now you're colliding with people head on going that fast. And I've worked those wrecks, and those are terrible wrecks. And I've seen the families and the devastation from those wrecks, and they're senseless and they don't have to happen. And so we really want some type of aggressive campaign. I'm all about social media. We have public resource officers. We have a great media campaign with the Highway Patrol. We want to put something out there to mitigate and to get people's attention, so we don't have to never ever write another 100-mile-an-hour speeding ticket again. As was alluded to earlier, the counties, almost every one of these sections that's lit up, and as you can see in your materials, every one of these has some type of interstate or 4-lane system that's going through, and that's where the 100-mile-an-hour plus speeders are attacking us, and it's really become like an epidemic post-COVID. And I really, I wish I had an answer why it's that way. I know that during COVID, that everything shut down, including our interaction with the public. You know, because nobody wanted to spread anything, and maybe we need to get that back a little bit better. But we're doing our best to make a difference. So in the top counties, as you can see in your materials, 6 of the top 7 counties are in Troop D. And I did just an internal study, and as a 90-day study through the winter months, it was November, December, and January. We wrote 320 tickets to people for going over 100 miles an hour just in those 6 counties, right? Just in Troop D, right? And 20 of those had Kansas plates. 300 of those had out-of-state plates. And in your materials, I think you'll see some statistics. About 29% of the people that go over 100 miles an hour in Kansas are Kansas, but all the rest of them are from out of state. All right. And I thought that was kind of an interesting statistic. But we know that because we work out there. Yesterday, I wrote 2 people over 100 miles an hour, one for 104, and he's in a Toyota 4-door, 60-year-old male, you know, and his wife, 104 miles an hour. And then I wrote another gentleman, 107 miles an hour. He was a young gentleman that fits the statistics of the young white male going that's fast because it's dangerous. He broke up with his girlfriend, he told me. And so it's just even I, as a captain of the Kansas Highway Patrol, that's what we're dealing with.
So that pie chart that shows 29% of Kansans, those are just tickets written in Kansas, right?
Yeah, these are all just Kansas tickets. Yep. I think I understood the questions. Yeah. So, so the other pie charts that we have up here kind of talk. Oh yeah, exactly. This is what you're alluding to. Yeah. So yeah, 29% of the tickets written over 100 mile an hour were to Kansas drivers, and all the rest of them were from out of state. You see the Colorado number down there. We tend to deal a lot with the Colorado drivers coming in because of our geography. And I'm telling you, when you stop a Colorado driver and give him a ticket for going 100 miles an hour, and the fine's $258, including the court cost, they don't blink. They're very polite. They say thank you and they go on. And we also are seeing a lot more often. We're stopping people multiple times, even in our own troop along these 6 counties, again for going over 100 miles an hour. You know, and so we're getting multiple offenses just in one trip that they're making. It's almost like they're figuring it into their budget for their vacation or something. I'm not sure what they're doing. So the graph up there about the age again shows that the 21-year-old male is basically the biggest offender. That kind of makes sense where they're at in life, I suppose. But I'm just telling you right now, it's everybody. I mean, it's we're stopping families, you know, with several people in the car going over 100 miles an hour. We're stopping 9-passenger vans. They're going over 100 miles an hour. The cars today are made to be able to go over 100 miles an hour. You know, back when I was younger, I never owned a car that could go 100 miles an hour, you know, but nowadays they're just supposedly safer, but they also can go faster. It does a gender graphic up there too, and predominantly males speed more often than females. So part of the campaign that we're doing out in Western Kansas is I know that we partnered up with KDOT on some of these things, and we really appreciate their backing. We all have the same goal, KDOT, Highway Patrol. And again, one of the things I want to point out is these graphs that we have here. It's just the Highway Patrol. It's not all the sheriff's departments and all the police departments. They're also writing all these tickets too. So that's also something to consider. So the time of day that most of these people are speeding is on the graph between seems like around 2 to 6 o'clock, and that's what we're seeing out in Western Kansas. The time of year, as I mentioned earlier, we wrote 320 over the winter months, but mostly when people are on vacation and the roads are nicer. In the summer months, they're speeding more. We're averaging over 100 tickets a month just in those 6 counties in Troop D throughout the year. And it's pushing 1,300 or so a year. The one thing I want to point out, and I think some of the questions in here were towards that, is what other charges are we charging these people? So about 41% of the time, we have what we call as a code charge, is what we refer to it as. And the code charge, the number one code charge is no valid driver's license of people going over 100 miles an hour. The second one is we have a lingering law in Kansas. And so the people that are going over 100 miles an hour, they just own the passing lane or the outside lane. And so that's their second charge, is lingering. And then the third most common code charge is suspended driver's license. So the majority, or a large number of these people that are going over 100 miles an hour, probably they shouldn't be driving anyway. Again, we need to take that in consideration when we put our minds together and come up with a solution. I know one of the questions, and the gentleman that has left the room earlier, is what the fines are. And again, if you're going 100 miles an hour in Kansas right now, it's $258, and that's the base. And then it extrapolates up from there. And again, if you want to look through that in your packet, I know we're short on time here, but the fines in Kansas, they don't seem to be much of a concern to the people that we're stopping.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are kind of out of time. I probably let the conversations get a little bit out of hand earlier. Representative Neely had one question he wanted to ask real quick.
Yeah, just because of what you just said, and
yes,
of the people that are suspended, revoked, etc., or just in general, of these that are going over 100 miles an hour because they've probably had multiple violations, how many of them don't have insurance then?
I don't have that number, but I'm guessing it's a high percentage if they don't.
What I figured.
All right.
Thank you.
And committee, I know a lot of you guys are going to have to get to other committees. So if you got to go, I just want to say real quickly, everything else we had on the agenda, we're just going to have a revised agenda and move it tomorrow. But Representative Proctor had a question.
From this presentation, we can reduce the number of people going over 100 miles an hour by building a wall with Colorado and Oklahoma. So I'd like to move that motion. No. So the folks, this is kind of the other conversation that happened the last two times we tried to do this, some variation on this bill, is a large portion of the folks that you're stopping are not from Kansas.
Correct.
And so do you think that, do you think that increasing the fine or suspending a driver's license or something like that is going to work for folks that are just driving through Kansas?
Only if we have an aggressive campaign to advertise that. I mean, like right now, you can jump on all these apps and you can see where all the speed traps are in Kansas, right? That's a little bit of a deterrent. If it was up to me, I'd put it every mile post, but I haven't figured out how to do that. So, but if we have an aggressive campaign, which we have an awesome media campaign in Kansas and awesome public resource officers, and we were known throughout the United States. And so it's going to take an aggressive campaign to get the attention. And that's, if I may, one of the reasons why I like to use the 100 mile an hour speed, because that catches people's attention. 35 miles an hour speed limit is not real catchy. And I know that doesn't sound even right, but we're trying to fix something. And we all know that 100 mile an hour catches people's attention. And if we could campaign that if you're going over 100 miles an hour in Kansas, we'll double your fine, or we'll restrict your driver's license, and make that a campaign. I think that's how we get people's attention personally. So,
is there a mechanism if somebody's from out of state? I'm ignorant on this. I apologize. Is there a mechanism to suspend somebody's driver's license from another state?
Yeah. We're compact states, so we recognize each other's laws. And there's very few that aren't in the compact anymore in the United States. And so Colorado's a compact state with Kansas, so we recognize them. They adopt it, and they'll suspend them. If they're going 20 over in Kansas, then they'll adopt it as a 20 over ticket in Colorado, and they have a point system there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, you said that you pulled over two people, 60-something and 20-something year person. Is that right? Did you ask why they were speeding over 100 miles? Is that a procedure whereby troopers ask questions? I mean, why were you traveling over or going over 100 miles an hour by chance?
We all have our spiel. And my spiel is, if they're going over 100 miles an hour, ask them if everything's all right, you know? And most of the time they're complacent, is what it is. Lots of distractions in the vehicle anymore. And that's probably the number one thing that's happening. Some people, like the young man that I stopped, he was distraught because he broke up with his girlfriend. He told me he wasn't paying attention. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Delberding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little bit of history to the colonel here. In 22, the bill changed from 100 miles per hour to 40 over. I did that because I was looking at other outside of the turnpike, a little bit slower, maybe 50, 55 mile an hour roads. 100's extremely excessive at that point. I was trying to bring it down. I was hoping I could have talked after Representative Ballard here made the comment earlier about the orange car, not the red car, but the orange car on the video clip. And yes, there was lives involved with that. I think there's other charges that come up in that too. But it was last year that we did look at 2146. And it was this committee that destroyed that bill. And everybody in this committee basically went along with it. And so the buck stops here. It was one of the representatives that didn't like what he seen. He rallied against it, and everybody was, yep, as we did different amendments. And it amended the bill to the point it was worthless. So I do think this needs to go, but you've got to get the people in this room to start to get it bought in on it. And the clip is good, but I think that clip involved a lot of other stuff. You know, that was truly reckless driving. That was truly other violations all the way there. To me, if I'm going 101 mile an hour on the turnpike and I don't see another car in sight, it's my problem if I die. What was going on in that clip was clearly something different. Something else to keep in mind, and just please put it in the back of your head. I'll bet you any amount of money you want to bet you've driven over 100 mile an hour in an emergency situation. But when that happens at that speed, the people, do not hear the sirens coming up. It happens too fast. You just don't hear it. So it too is a dangerous situation. And yeah, you can argue we've got special training. Some of us do too. But please keep that in mind. It's a two-way street there. Thank you.
Representative Hoy, this is the last question, by the way. We got to get out of here so the next committee can use the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If somebody is the only crime they're committing or infraction they're committing is driving 100 miles per hour or over, and that causes an accident that causes death or serious injury, are there other current crimes that could be charged?
Yes, there is. If they cause a crash, then you can charge them with reckless driving with that. Really depends on there's a lot of different scenarios, I'm sorry, that could play into that. So,
okay, because I do look at this as a prevention issue, but as well as needs to be a sense of justice too. If something does happen to your family member, you don't want them to just get a speeding ticket. And so we've been talking a lot about reckless driving, and I would think another thing that we could consider doing is just operating a motor vehicle at the speed of 100 miles per hour or whatever we determine the appropriate excessive speeding infraction to be to the definition of reckless driving, and have that just be another indicator for that offense. Just a thought.
All right. I want to thank everybody on the committee for being here and engaging in this conversation. I don't think there's simple answers, but I think we've got more data and we can move forward. And thank you for your testimony, sir. All right, committee. Like I say, we're going to move everything that was on the schedule for today that we didn't get to tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow. We're adjourned.